Hello, everybody. My name is Vanessa, and I'm an intern with OC Habitats. Today, I'll be giving a presentation on the 30 by 30 initiative and what that means, and also kind of a little bit of insight into how Orange County will help play a role in meeting the goals set out by the 30 by 30 initiative. So we'll cover three main topics today. What is 30 by 30? So kind of an overview of the objectives and goals for 30 by 30. We will also then cover why this is important. So kind of understanding how this will benefit the environment and humans in general. And then third, what does this mean for Orange County? So more of a local context of the Orange County nonprofits and how those nonprofits will help play a role in meeting the goals set out by 30 by 30. So first, what is 30 by 30? So 30 by 30, if you haven't heard of it, if you have, it's basically an initiative to protect at least 30% of the land and inland waters, as well as 30% of the oceans by the year 2030. So this was stated in an initiative, in an executive order by President Biden on January 27th of 2021. It was specifically Section 216 of Executive Order 14008, and it's a conservation commitment goal. So it also has a companion plan called the America the Beautiful Plan, which we will go over briefly. And basically, the America the Beautiful Plan sets out some guidelines for how they want to accomplish the 30 by 30 conservation commitment goal. So the main objectives of 30 by 30 are to protect biodiversity. So we want to protect species richness and abundance of the plant and animal species found throughout the United States. And we will also try to slow extinction rates with this conservation goal. And it will help institute some natural climate solutions to help fight the impacts of climate change we're seeing throughout the country. So utilizing some ecosystem services such as carbon storage and water purification and cooling temperatures, which if you have not heard of ecosystem services, they are basically some of the things that the environment does for humans that we benefit off of. So things like pollination, providing us food and clean water, and even aesthetic value and recreational value. So those are all ecosystem services that we will help utilize with the conservation goals that we're trying to accomplish with 30 by 30. Some additional objectives as well for 30 by 30 is to have a local focus. So supporting locally led conservation goals and restoration projects. It also seeks to amplify Indigenous voices by including Indigenous groups in the planning of conservation as to not disrespect the tribal visions for conservation, and also implement environmental equity. So increasing access to open and green spaces, which has become a very big problem in America with the unequal access to green space, which has profound health impacts on people. So that is the three additional objectives of the goals. So currently in the United States, we do have a good amount of land conserved. So about 26% of our coastal waters and about 12% of the land in the United States currently meets the conservation status requirements. This will mean about the 289 million acres we have currently will need to increase to 729 million acres to meet the goals set out by 30 by 30. And you can kind of see a map to the side of some of the area that we have currently conserved, which kind of brings up a point about, since this is a science-based plan, it will not mean that every single state will have to be committed to conserving 30% of its land. It will be based on what area is most biologically, valuable to conserve. So that's why you can see on the West Coast, and specifically in California, which is known as a biological hotspot, you have a lot more land that's being conserved than, say, in the Midwest, where there might not be as much species abundance and richness as you see on the West Coast. So in California, we have become kind of a leader in terms of conservation. In October of 2020, Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order to basically make sure California would be committed to conserving 30% of the land and water by 2030. So meeting those goals that were set out in the 30 by 30 plan. And that made California the first state to commit to those goals. They also, currently in California, we have about 22% of our land protected, which is about 100 million acres. And that was found by the US Geological Survey in 2016. So we are on our way to be able to meet those goals, which is great news. So now I will move on to why this conservation is important. So yes, conservation is extremely important for preserving the environment for long-term into the future. So it prioritizes protecting natural habitats. 30 by 30 does. So we'll benefit a lot from protecting natural habitats in terms of fighting climate change, the impacts caused by climate change. I mentioned a little bit about natural climate solutions by utilizing ecosystem services. So that'll be extremely beneficial if we meet the goals of 30 by 30. It will also support the systems like clean air and water, and also food, and just overall a good quality of life. And it will, like I mentioned before as well, increase access to green space, which is extremely important now as we're trying to implement more environmental justice into conservation and ensuring that everyone has equal access to outdoor space. So like I mentioned before, America the Beautiful is an initiative that was introduced in partnership with meeting 30 by 30 goals. And so there are 8 main objectives of America the Beautiful. So that is to make sure that there's lots of collaboration and inclusion, that this plan will benefit all people. It will support locally led conservation, honor tribal sovereignty. It'll create jobs and healthy communities, honor private property rights, and use science as a guide, as well as build on existing tools and emphasize adaptiveness and flexibility. So I wanted to touch on briefly the honoring private property rights, because there is some controversy with the America the Beautiful and 30 by 30 initiatives. And that stems from a lot of misinformation on how the United States will meet these goals. So there are some people who believe that to meet these goals, it will all be publicly owned land, and so that the United States would have to acquire this land to be able to preserve it, but that is not the case. It will rely heavily as well on private land ownership. So basically, the way that will be dealt with is that the United States might offer, let's say, incentives to landowners to protect their land instead of using it for other purposes like developing or building or even agriculture. And the way that they will count conservation land as well would most likely also include areas that are being used as, carbon sequestering areas. So planting trees, and even things like in farming and agricultural regions, implementing some shrubs, trees, or even native habitat strips to help sequester carbon, or I guess support native animal species. So like we're seeing in California, if you've ever driven up the coast and seen all of the almond trees, the monocultures kind of in the Central Valley area, in there, they're kind of experimenting with native vegetation strips to support native pollinator species. So things like that might be included, the native vegetation strips may be included in this to be able to meet the goals and still support native species while also profiting off of, our agriculture that we rely on economically. So, and this leads me into that many studies have shown that involving the community, and so educating the community and things like that, is key in conservation planning, and it will result in greater levels of public support, which they're starting to see across the country as well, in areas that, generally may have some negative viewpoints on conservation. Really getting out there and educating the public on why it's important and how they can benefit from it has seen great results. So in places like Pennsylvania, they are spending time to educate people on, why having a riparian buffer zone to help filter the runoff water from agriculture, from preventing it from getting into our waterways, that is, become very beneficial, and more farmers are starting to want to plant trees near riverways to help prevent pollution from entering our waterways after being educated by people who work for the government and are trying to help people learn about why environmental protection is important. So this is also a scientifically based number. If anyone was wondering why it's 30% by 2030. Studies have been conducted that show that across ecoregions, we need to protect between 25 to 75% of all land in some form, and to be able to maintain biological diversity across the world. And specifically, the Global Deal for Nature calls for 30% of Earth to be formally protected, with an additional 20% designated as climate stabilization areas by 2030. So there has been research done into what specifically, how much we should conserve, and they have landed on 30% being a good number as of right now to try to attain in the near future. So now I can open this up for any questions and look if I don't think there's any chats right now. So if anyone wants to turn on their mic and ask anything, I'm open to questions or put anything in the chat. Okay, if not, I'm going.
We have one question. What on that last slide, what was the designated climate stabilization areas? Do you know what that would entail?
Oh, right. So I'm not entirely sure what that would entail. I'm going to guess it may have something to do with like implementing carbon sequestering plants and things like that. That would be my best guess. To help, ensure that, or like even in urban areas where we normally have, heat islands where all the paved area causes an increased amount of, heat in the area, maybe integrating more green space as well in those areas to help, stabilize climate and make it a little bit cooler. So green roofs, things like that, that would be my guess about what that would mean. Okay. I think that's good then, and I will continue to the third section of the presentation. So now I will look at kind of how locally this will impact Orange County and some of the nonprofits that are helping currently to, conserve land, and also in the future continue those conservation efforts and increase the amount of land we are protecting successfully in the county. So starting with OC Habitats, which is our organization, we're currently working on with three other partner organizations to conserve and restore some land. So in Newport Back Bay, we are partnered with Project Grow, and we have a mix of restoration projects focusing on salt marsh and riparian habitats. So in these areas, we remove some invasive species. So for example, in the salt marsh, we're removing Algerian sea lavender as well as some ice plant. And then in the riparian zones, we remove some invasive species such as black mustard and pampas grass and castor bean. and even sometimes removing some native plants that are just not conducive to what we want to do for the area, and instead planting some native plants in the riparian zone, such as willows, which are more riparian plants that will help support some endangered species, such as the balding savanna sparrow and Leastbell's vireo, which really thrive with those types of plants. So that's the work we're doing in Newport Back Bay. And then Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy, we are partnered with them to help maintain their properties that they have, which I will go in a little bit more detail about their properties on the next slide. But there we do trash removal. We also have helped install some pathways, and we've done invasive plant removal. So plants like the sea rocket and ice plants have been removed there. And we also do some installation of native plants there as well. So some salt marsh plants and things like that. And in Turtle Rock Nature Center, which is a newer partnership that we have been working on pulling some invasive plants. So things like black mustard and star thistle. We've also trimmed back some other native plants to help make room for new plantings. And we spent some time removing some dead organic material that had been building up on the property for years, which was really important as it posed a risk for fire, which I know we know all too well about in California. So just making sure that, you know, in the future, these properties will be great spaces for native habitat, and so the species that call these places home, and also great places for people to go learn about the native habitats of Orange County, and yeah, just get to know why native plants are so important to preserve. So in Huntington Beach Wetlands, which I mentioned briefly, their restoration projects cover about 190 acres of wetland that they own, and 27 of those acres are coastal dune habitats. The four main marshes that they own, properties that they own, are Talbert Marsh, which was fully restored in 1989. This marsh has direct tidal access, and it's considered one of the most successful saltwater marsh restorations in the state. So a lot of people have looked to Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy and that restoration project and kind of strived to attain those results that they were able to obtain as well. Then Brookhurst Marsh was successfully restored in 2009, Magnolia Marsh in 2010, and more recently, Newland Marsh has been required, and that restoration is projected to be completed in 2023 and 2024. And so OC Habitats helps to, restore these properties every month. So every, 1 day every month on a Saturday, we'll be out there helping to make sure that we can take these properties and really restore them to their natural states, so that the migrating bird populations will be able to land there and continue their journey, and make sure their populations are staying at good levels. So and something that's very exciting is the Banning Ranch Conservancy's ability to acquire enough funding so to buy the Banning Ranch property. So this has just happened. They've just been able to acquire the final amount of money through a grant to ensure that they will be able to fund the purchase of a 384 acre, currently it's an active oil field. It's in Newport Beach. If this is the last remaining unprotected coastal area south of Ventura County. So this will be huge once the purchase goes through. Banning Ranch Conservancy is actually partnered with the Trust for Public Land, who will be conducting the purchase. And so this will mean, if the purchase is successful, that there will be a lot of remediation that's needed to, address the impact that being an active oil field has caused on the area. But that will also mean a lot of restoration projects in the future. And this will definitely be a huge increase in Orange County's part in playing, they're playing in attaining the 30 by 30 conservation goals and the state's conservation goals. It will also be really important for that open green space access I was mentioning, as about over 8.4 million people live within an hour of this future park. And so half of those people are also considered low income. So it'll be really important for environmental equity and environmental justice in increasing access to green space. And I also wanted to mention that it is very important for our Indigenous people who live in the area as well, as it was historically a trading center for some of the tribes that were in the area. And so this will be really important as well for Indigenous people to have this space to go access, and really, making sure that we, are cognizant of how important that is to Indigenous people will also be a huge part of the restoration process, which is another goal for 30 by 30 is to include Indigenous people in the planning and conservation. So this will be also a very good opportunity for locals to get involved in conservation, as Banning Ranch Conservancy really wants the community to be involved in the planning and restoration process, and to understand what people want in terms of the park and what type of recreational activities they should include. So, and now I'll move on to the Laguna Ocean Foundation. So Laguna Ocean Foundation does a lot of education on tidal regions in our area, and they also have been working on getting a estuary restoration project approved. So they're in the process of this, and I inserted an image of their plan for this project. So they have seen that this Elisa Creek has currently been overrun by invasive plants, and it is filled with unhealthy urban runoff. So their plan, they want to address this and make it a much healthier habitat and ecosystem, so that native fish and wading freshwater birds and other wildlife are able to thrive in this area. And so if the restoration project goes through, then they will be able to support a variety of coastal habitats, including beach dunes, tidal mudflats, salt marshes, tool marshes, cattails, and shallow freshwater habitats, which are all very important ecosystems that we are so lucky to have in California that a lot of other places don't. So we definitely want to continue to restore and protect these regions for future generations, so that we have that biodiversity, that really important biodiversity that was mentioned, into the future. So now I'll talk about Bolsa Chica's restoration projects. So the Bolsa Chica Conservancy has about 1,300 acres of coastal estuary in Huntington Beach, and they have been active in restoration projects since 1990. They began with the removal of non-native plants, and they've removed about 200 tons of non-native invasive plant species. They've also expanded their efforts later after that initial removal of plants. They expanded it to include the construction of dune habitats for certain species that utilize that. So like the California least tern uses some of the barges and dunes that have been constructed. They also plant some native plant species in the area, which those species that I mentioned benefit greatly from. And they have planted more than 5,000 plant species so far, and they also hold restorations very frequently. So those are all some great opportunities on how to get involved and support these organizations in their conservation and restoration efforts. And just wanted to mention, if anyone was wondering on how to help with restorations, OC Habitats does hold restoration projects every month in Upper Newport Back Bay and Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy. So if anyone's interested, you can scan the screen that I have up here now. It'll take you to our website and show you some of the upcoming events we have for restoration projects. So I'll open it up to any questions or discussion now, if anyone would like to give any input or ideas or any questions that they have.
Do you know what habitat the Banning Ranch acquisition is? Is it more wetlands?
Yeah, so they have a wide variety of habitats. So they do have some, I think, wetland. And they also have some, it's a specific type of grassland, which is extremely rare now in Orange County because of all the development of our land. So most of the land we have remaining that is, protected or not built upon yet is chaparral, coastal sage scrub, things like that. So it'll be really cool to see that we have some of this rare grassland habitat. I know they also have some really important vernal pools, which are also not super common anymore in Orange County. So those are some of the habitats that they have that are more rare. And just mentioning that too, some of the species that they have there include the burrowing owl, which is an endangered species. And then they have, think that there may be some ridgeway rails there, which is another species that is very important, and the California gnatcatcher. So those are all some species that are found in that area and some of the habitats that could definitely be beneficial to protect since they're pretty rare in this area now. So. Okay, I think Tiffany has a comment. So you said that at the beginning that 12% of the land already meets the requirements, with most of it being on the West Coast, with the other 18% of the land most likely be on the West Coast as well. Yeah, so I haven't been able to access the like prospective maps that they have, but they do have some maps. I think if you know like GIS and things like that, I think more people who are educated on that can kind of look at those maps and see a little bit better what specific areas they're kind of looking at in terms of what they want to conserve, but it will probably most likely be on the more biological, like biodiversity hotspot areas. And in the United States, the California is the biodiversity hotspot. It's one of the, I think, 36 biodiversity hotspots in the world. So it probably will mostly focus on like the West Coast area that does have more open space and more biodiversity, just because that'll be the best place to get the most bang for your buck, sort of say, in terms of conservation. So most likely it will kind of stay in one area with less in the Midwest. There's also been a lot of pushback from the Midwest with some states making it very clear they do not want to meet these goals. So I think in general, it might just be easier for them to focus on states that are more open to like conservation for the time being, but hopefully that will subside with more people being educated on what the plan actually entails and that it won't be a land grab like a lot of people think it will be. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see what specifically is going to be done about that. But yeah, I think it will focus on the West Coast probably. Okay, so then I have another question for OCH restoration projects. How often are surveys/studies conducted to check in on the progress of our efforts? I'm not privy to the exact like survey or studies being conducted. I do know at Upper Newport Back Bay, there are biologists who go out there and make sure they check how things are going, because those are mitigation projects. So someone is paying to make sure that those restorations are being done properly, and they have requirements they have to meet to make sure that, things are being followed the way that they need to be, to meet the state requirements for the restoration projects that they have to conduct. So there are biologists who I know go out on those properties and check the placement of the plants. They check how many plants are being installed, and they also are checking for the endangered species that are in those areas, that we're not impacting them, we're not getting too close. And I think the same thing is also occurs in Huntington Beach Wetlands Conservancy, where we work as well, where they have biologists who have permits to go out near these nesting sites of endangered bird species, or even near endangered plant species that they might have on the property, that most people would not be able to approach, and they check on the progress and make sure that things are going well. They also have people who are making restoration plans. So they come up with the best, I guess, game plan on where to plant plants, what plants we're supposed to be planting in certain areas, and you know, to get the best results, the best outcomes out of our efforts. So I think they're more of the people who would be checking in on that. So I don't think OC Habitats does anything like that, but I do know there are people, biologists who are trained professionals, who are going up and checking on things pretty regularly. So
We also do like take event reports every time we have restoration, and that gets included into our annual reports and quarterly reports. So we were keeping track of like the amount of trash we take out and the amount of invasives we take out. So a lot of that can be used to help those people who are making plans.
Yep. Okay. Not sure if anyone else has any questions or comments. If not, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming to this presentation. I really appreciate everyone spending the time to learn about this and learn about some of the nonprofits in Orange County and the work that they're doing. There are many more nonprofits, and they can all benefit from people's support, whether that be spending time going to restoration events, spreading the word with other people about the work that they're doing, or even donating any money that you have to them that can help them meet these restoration goals or environmental conservation goals. It's all very valuable, and every single nonprofit, environmental nonprofit, appreciates it greatly. So just want to thank everyone for spending this time coming here, because you're helping to further these goals by spending the time and learning about environmental issues. So I also want to mention our email. So if anyone has any questions or wants to get into contact with OC Habitats, that is och@ochabitats.org. Our website is www.ochhabitats.org, and our social media, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, as well as I think TikTok now at OC Habitats. So those are all our ways to get in contact with us. And thank you again for spending the time and learning about this issue.